Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm your host, Paula Farmer, and welcome to Special Events with Book Passage, where we do pride ourselves on curating the best book talks featuring established and acclaimed authors, as well as new, interesting, and emerging writers. That's fiction, nonfiction. We cover it all. Tonight's featured book and author are no exception to that. So get your comments ready and your questions ready. We have the chat available for you to put those in, and I promise we will get to all of them as soon as possible. That, of course, is for our live audience. If you're joining us later, thank you. We love our archival audience. Tamara Winfrey Harris is a writer, speaker, and dedicated champion for all women and girls. She serves as president of Women's Fund of Central Indiana, Special Interest Fund of Central Indiana Community Foundation that convenes, invests, and advocates so all who identify as women or girls in Central Indiana have an equitable opportunity to reach their full potential, no matter where their place, race, or identity. Tamara is co-founder of Black Women's Writing Society, a monthly virtual space for Black femme creatives in Indianapolis. As a writer, Tamara specializes in the ever-evolving place where current events, politics, and pop culture intersect with race and gender. Speaking of writing, her new book, A Black Woman's Guide to Getting Free, is an empowering feminist guide for Black women on living unapologetically and authentically. Through it, you will see how to free up your authentic self from the exceptions and stereotypes and the expectations and stereotypes, maybe the exceptions, I don't know, of American culture. Tamara's previous book is the bestseller, The Sisters Are All Right. Although there was no way, and Tamara and I were talking about this earlier, there's no way that she or any of us could have known what was going to happen a few days ago happened. But for obvious reasons, and personally, I can't think, honestly, Tamara, of a better time to have released this book and celebrate Black women, Black excellence, and share in the national excitement. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Tamara Winfrey Harris. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much for having me. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Okay, I want to do something a little different. I know I'm here. This is an author talk, and you're used to asking me questions, but I would like to ask you a question. And that is, how do you define freedom? And I ask that because if we want to live life as free Black women, we have to define what liberation means, right? You can't use a GPS without having a destination in mind. So I think to understand your personal definition of liberation, it's useful to explore, the moments when you feel most free. Who is there? Who is not there? How do you show up? Why do you feel unshackled in those moments? There are ways that I think you will experience freedom that are intensely personal and informed by your unique story. And certainly, if we're going to discuss a book called The Black Woman's Guide to Getting Free, we have to start there, as I do in my latest book. The first section is about defining what freedom is. So I would love to hear from you. How do you define personal freedom? If you have an answer to that, please drop your answer in the chat. But while you do, I'd like to share some things that the Black women I talked to told me. So Taylor, who is a 20-something recent graduate, said she was tired of the insistence that Black women have to be twice as good to get half as much. So she told me the freedom to not be is just as important as the freedom to be. Black women should be free to struggle, to be mediocre, or not be the very best. Diane, another woman, said, the ability to show up as my authentic self in any space positively affects my confidence and releases me from the shackles of societal expectations. To me, it's important that I'm able to wear my hair in any state that I want, to freely express my personality through clothing choices, to incorporate African American vernacular English in my speech and not have to constantly code switch, to challenge authority and the people around me when their perspectives are limited, and to be as extra and loud or quiet and subdued as I want to be without concern for how other people are perceiving me or judging me. And another quote that I really love came from a woman named Kamika, and she said, "I want to free myself from the expectations of Blackness and womanhood and be deeply connected to myself as spirit and to who God created. Then I get to decide how I will navigate the world as a Black person and as a woman. I choose what that means for me. The world does not get to determine who I am. I'm free to explore the vastness of the Black experience. Regarding womanhood, I am free to explore the masculine and the feminine, to be strong or weak or vulnerable, assertive, loud or silent, to lead or be led. I am free to choose or just be still." So, when I asked Black women about what freedom is to them, there were so many diverse responses. But I would say this, that nearly every Black woman's response to what is freedom could be distilled to one thing, and it was freedom of choice. We want financial security, so we're free to choose. We want structural barriers removed, so we are free to choose. We want to be affirmed in choosing how we show up as Black people, as women, and any other intersected identities. We want to make decisions that support ourselves and our health, and choose ourselves, our families, our lives without judgment or punishment. Anything else is bondage. And in fact, Bell Hooks, who we all should listen to in her work, Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center, said, being oppressed means the absence of choices. Choice is freedom. Oh, I love it. Some of you gave me your definitions of freedom. So Gabrielle says, freedom is to not have to be concerned about where I live based on politics or what people of other races think about me based on race. I love it. And then someone else said, to support my daughters and grandgirls with female power, no matter what color we are. Yes, choice is freedom. But here's the other thing. More than 60% of Black women I spoke to said they don't feel free because of sexism and racism and stereotypes that have followed Black women for centuries. But we deserve joy and liberation, and A Black Woman's Guide to Getting Free is my formula for getting there. My first two books, The Sisters Are All Right and Dear Black Girl, in those, I talked a lot about those stereotypes, the Jezebel, the Sapphire, the Mammy, the matriarch. This, and then at the end of Dear Black Girl, I said, we will get free together. Meaning, if as women, Black women and girls, we can love each other and be vulnerable with each other, we can get free. And I was doing a book event, and this young woman asked, but how are we supposed to do that with all of this, all of the sexism, all of the racism, all of the things that we all face? Well, tonight, I would like to share with you the 6 pillars of Black femme freedom, according to me. So the first of those is to spot the distortions. So Black women have to learn to see distorted beliefs about ourselves. So those stereotypes I talked about, have to see them and recognize the ways they are maintained by the broader society and our own communities. And we must teach future generations to do the same. There's a woman in my book named Lisa, and she compares it to learning to identify poison before it hits your bloodstream and threatens your well-being. So you have to learn to identify those biases about ourselves, and they're everywhere. It's in the air we breathe. It's in music, it's in television shows, portrayals. But also, I would imagine any Black woman who is listening right now, any woman who is listening knows, I think we're going to have to guard our peace and freedom over the next several months of the US presidential election because, not 24 hours had passed after Vice President Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee. We're already being hammered with gross distortions of Black women and Southeast Asian women and women in general. For instance, when critics accuse Kamala Harris of, who's a highly qualified candidate, by the way, of sleeping her way into her position. They're invoking the Jezebel stereotype that has followed Black women for centuries. It is misogynoir. It is a mix of racism and sexism. When they complain about her aggression, as they did when she was facing off against Joe Biden during the 2020 election, it's the sapphire trope, right? Rearing its head. The rhetorical shots are intended to wound this Black biracial candidate's reputation, but make no mistake, Black women and Southeast Asian women and all women will be catching strays in those conversations. But I think on some level, we come to expect those kind of things in mainstream culture. We aren't always as vigilant of recognizing those distortions when they come from people who are supposed to love us. And so I thought one thing I might share with you is a profile that is in my book. Throughout the book, I had long conversations with women to illustrate these pillars and how they work them into their lives. And I want you to hear from someone named Carolyn. Carolyn said, "Mama was really my great-great-grandmother's sister. When I was born, she looked at my biological mother and thought, she can't raise this baby. This baby live over here now. My mother died when I was 6 and the arrangement became permanent. Now, Mama was born in 1909, and she was both ahead of her time and a product of her time. She got divorced in the 1930s when folks didn't do that. She worked several jobs to care for her children rather than deal with her husband's shit. She was one of the first women in the nation to get a barber's license. She worked for a company that didn't promote women or Black folks, but they promoted her. She was a trailblazer. Now, Mama told me, a little Black girl growing up in the 1990s, that I could be anything I wanted to be. And she made sure that was true. When my teacher kept favoring this little light-skinned girl with a swinging ponytail over me, Mama marched right up to that school and snapped on everybody for not giving me the same opportunities that they were giving this other child. She fought for me. Now, Mama was also the person who helped teach me that dark skin was bad. And I, a dark-skinned fat girl with short hair, was not beautiful. And she didn't say that, but I got the message. I noticed the way she vigilantly watched my skin in the summertime, calling me in before I could get any darker. And I remember when I wanted to wear a Black dress to the prom, she said no, because folks wouldn't be able to see me. There were plenty of other comments here and there. I knew the deal. I graduated from one of the most prestigious universities in the country. I have 2 master's degrees. I have a doctorate. And I think my mama still might have believed my greatest accomplishment was giving birth to 2 non-dark-skinned babies. She was alive to meet my oldest. And if you look at my daughter's baby pictures, she's always wearing some big head covering. That's because my mama was trying to help another generation and protect the baby's pretty yellow skin. Mama wasn't being malicious. She wanted the best for me. I know that our society does not value Blackness or dark skin or fatness. America believes women should be beautiful, and it doesn't find any of these things beautiful. Mama wasn't against a woman using her feminine wiles to get ahead, but she was pretty sure that wasn't available to the likes of me. I think she thought, let's try and fight for you in other ways. I need you to be the smartest person in the room because you'll never be the prettiest. But here's the thing. As a dark-skinned woman, I don't need to be prepared for colorism. I live it. I struggle to feel beautiful in my skin, Still, even now, when everybody is allegedly all about inclusion and body positivity, I often feel that I should be grateful just to be included in spaces, since no one is checking for dark-skinned people and Black women anyway. This idea of me as automatically less than affects everything I do. Mama thought she was helping, but she made me feel like maybe she believed what society thought about me, that maybe they were right. Spot the distortions, no matter who they come from. The second pillar is know your truth. So we have to be able to locate our authentic selves outside of society's distorted beliefs about us. So we have to kind of unhook our authentic selves from the caricatures that have been crafted to abet human bondage and white supremacy and patriarchy. So that means you have to know who you are when you are not trying to outrun one of those stereotypes, and also not trying to lean in to those stereotypes or beliefs about who we are. And I say not lean in because, one of those stereotypes, the mammy stereotype, says that, Black women exist to serve. We don't have needs of our own. So, very often I find that many women, especially high achieving Black women, always feel like everything is on them. And oftentimes it is, but they feel this expectation not to honor their own desires and their own needs and to put those things second to other people. And that's ultimately very damaging. So know your truth, know how to locate yourself absent all of those stereotypes. The third pillar is number 3, celebrate the real you. So you would think that's easy. It's not. So we can learn to accept, know who your authentic self is, but it can get a little harder, when there are elements of your identity that do match some of those stereotypes or you've been told are bad. So, our sex lives, our singleness, the way our natural hair or coarse, tightly, curled hair looks, speaking up and advocating, without thinking that you're aggressive. Even, like I said, benign things like, Black women are probably the only group that I ever hear people say, she's too educated. She's too accomplished. Oh my gosh, she owns her own home. Who will ever want to marry her? So celebrating the real you means learning to celebrate all the parts of yourself, the benign things, but also the mistakes that you may have made. I'd like to share another profile, and this one is of a woman named Nikki. And here's what I say, though, before that profile. It's one thing to unearth the woman you are. It's another to love that woman. So if you may have endured difficult things, you may have made grievous mistakes. Both of these things are part of the human condition. But society does not offer Black women and girls much grace. You have to offer yourself grace. As social justice activist Brian Stevenson writes in Just Mercy, each of us is more than the worst thing we've ever done. You are not your trauma or your fuck-ups, but they are part of the whole you. And that whole deserves celebration. I'm just going to read a part of Nikki's profile because she says some really important things. She said, I used to think there were parts of myself that I needed to eliminate to be acceptable. I've come to learn that the opposite is true. Freedom happens by inclusion rather than by exclusion. Freedom is accepting the beauty in your whole self. When I introduce myself, I introduce all of my parts. I'm Nikki. I'm a recovering addict. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I'm a survivor of childhood and adult sexual trauma. I'm a mother. I'm a yoga therapist. I'm a teacher. I'm a grandmother. I'm a great grandmother. I'm a bitch. I'm a former sex worker. All of those identities have been on Team Nikki. How dare I think about excluding them? How dare I make them bad? They've all been part of my survival, healing and moving toward more freedom and liberation for me has come from including and honoring all of those parts, all of them. They are part of my whole. So learn to celebrate the real you, even the hard parts. So the fourth pillar is understanding the cost of freedom. So there are always going to be places, unfortunately, where your full Black woman self is not safe or is not welcome. So we have to determine how much we are willing to pay to inhabit spaces where our authentic selves might be unsafe or unwelcome. For instance, is that high paying corporate job worth the ways that you might have to sacrifice your identity to fit in? The answer may be yes, maybe no. There's no wrong response, but a free Black woman must know the answer. There are two stories that I share in this chapter, and it's very interesting. Two women that both worked in finance. One left corporate America. She worked on Wall Street, and she told me how when she was working, how she dressed in clothes that she really couldn't afford, because she knew that's what she needed to fit in. She wore her hair the straightest. She even gave up her name. She had a longer name that the white people she worked with said they couldn't possibly pronounce. So she let them shorten it. But still, one day in a meeting where she was the only Black woman present, someone referred to her as the Black girl, not by her name, just the Black girl. And she said she went to her car after that and cried. She eventually left corporate America, and she told me she'd never return. She's now doing fantastically. She's an author. She has her own business. I talked to another woman who told me that she grew up without a lot, and she watched her parents struggle. And she felt her job in banking afforded her a lot of the choice that she never had growing up. She said, I am in my 30s. I want to be a mom. I don't have a partner. I may have to do IVF. That's really expensive. I know what neighborhood I want to live in. And so if I have to go to work and I have to code switch and I have to make some concessions, I'm fine doing that because I want this sort of stability. Neither of those answers are wrong, but it's important for you to know what your answers are. What is the cost of freedom? What are you willing to pay? So the fifth is practice freedom, because even when you get there, you don't stay there. A lot of what inspired this book for me was when I was going through a 200-hour yoga teacher training. You read all the foundational books and scriptures of yoga, including the Yoga Sutras, written by Patanjali. And he has this idea that we are all these divine beings having a human experience. We are pure awareness. But the reason we don't know that is because of all of these distortions and all of the things that are going on in a human world. And when I read that, I said, this sounds like Black women, because I think we are divine, but we are faced with all of these distortions. And it's hard to know who we really are because we're always being told you're this, you're that, you're not right, fix this. And so even though we can get to freedom, I think, there are going to be times when you're knocked off of your freedom path and you have to learn how to get back to that liberated space. What are the things that you need to do to come back to wholeness? So you have to think of liberation not so much as a destination, but as a sustained practice for choosing your highest individual good again and again. So cultivating a freedom practice that's designed to center your all rightness and keep your well-being top of mind. The very last pillar is see free Black women everywhere. Because, once you are rooted in your own Black femme freedom, then you can learn to better see and nurture the freedom of other Black women and girls. Unfortunately, sometimes we as Black women can be in the vanguard of enforcing some of those oppressions and biases on other women. And we know why, because again, Black women aren't given a lot of grace. And we know that we're judged unfairly, and we're judged based on what other people do. And so, it's very easy to always be looking over there to see how that woman is showing up. And is she showing up correctly? And if she's not showing up in a way that society deems respectable, what impact is that going to have on me? I just want to share a little bit of the chapter on See Free Black Women Everywhere. It starts like this, and it mentions a pop culture moment that you may remember. Like a lot of Black women, I wear a silk or satin bonnet at night to maintain moisture in my highly textured hair and to preserve my hairstyle. Now, I don't wear my bonnet or any other sleepwear outside of my house, so I don't run the risk of a tap on the shoulder from Auntie Monique. Back in 2021, the comedian sparked a weeks-long public debate about young Black women's comportment after she spotted young Black women in the airport wearing pajama pants, flip-flops, and bonnets. She was so aghast that she took to Instagram to deliver a PSA. She said, I've been seeing it not just at the airport, I've been seeing it at the store, at the mall. When do we lose our pride in representing ourselves? She warned that she would step to any Black woman she encountered in the streets, in the airports, in the Walmart. You got on a bonnet and you got slippers on and you look like what the fuck. And she urged other wise Black women of a certain age to do the same. Look, I think wearing bonnets and sleep clothes outside of the house is tacky. I am simply a product of my generation, that is Generation X, but I will not be tapping any young Black women on the shoulder at the airport or anywhere else. The bonnet debate is an example of how Black women are judged harshly and given little grace. At my Big 12 college, go Cyclones, it was not uncommon to see my mostly white fellow women students around campus with wet hair and men's boxer shorts over leggings. Was that fashionable? No. Was it tacky? Maybe. Lazy? Probably. But who cares? Those women were on campus to get an education. No one doubted their personal pride. No one suggested that other people would be justified in treating these women poorly. No one suggested that other people would be justified in treating all white women poorly just because of a few young women's sartorial choices. No one suggested that the long work of women's suffragists like Elizabeth Cady Stanton or Susan B. Anthony was for naught because young white women in the late 80s and early 90s were wearing boxers instead of bustles. The idea is absurd, and in a society with increasingly expansive and relaxed ideas about dress, it is worth asking why the choices of Black women are uniquely concerning. We have to learn to see our sisters as free everywhere. And if Black women can do this and teach our daughters to do this too, we can unlock our full power and walk into any room honoring our highest authentic selves, even if no one else does. We can more clearly love ourselves, prioritize ourselves, and secure our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being in the face of external forces. We can advocate for ourselves and our sisters, which is a form of self-love and self-care in itself, and we can live lives of abundance and joy. Oh my gosh. And if that happens, that would be monumental. So remember those pillars, spot the distortion, know your truth, celebrate the real you, understand the cost of freedom, practice freedom, and see free Black women everywhere. Thank you. And now I'm ready for your questions. I hope you have a lot of them. Paula, are you coming back to talk to me?
I am indeed. And I have questions. I know that.
Oh,
I
wonderful.
think there was a couple more
Oh, I
chats,
see it.
people answering your question. Someone said, as far as freedom, what freedom is to them, I don't think you mentioned this one, to have professional and financial strength.
Financial strength. Yes.
Yeah, and we know we live in a capitalist
Yeah.
society.
It,
Um,
exactly. Which is what makes some of these things so difficult,
yes,
right?
yeah,
Because you have to support yourself, you have to support your family, so in some cases you're going to have to you don't get out of this without compromising, you just don't.
right. Absolutely. And historically, um, Black women, but Black families have not had that
Mm-hmm.
generational wealth or education about finances to pass on to each other. So hopefully that's kind of changing. And for
Mm-hmm.
whoever wrote that, I mean, that's the way, if you don't have the professional
Mm-hmm.
strength and the financial strength specifically already, I have no idea how old or young you are, but that's
Mm-hmm.
something to think about as far as educating. What gets you to that point of financial,
privilege Privilege buys you some freedom. I mean, which
right?
is
That's
why
true.
your
Yeah,
view of freedom is like changes over your life. Like I was
true.
explaining to someone, like, I've got tattoos on my forearms. I wear my hair in locks, natural.
Mhm.
But I'm also 54 years old. I have like a lot, I have a long resume. So I can be the president of an organization and have those things. Now, when I was 22, I probably didn't have that latitude. I just didn't. I mean,
Yeah,
I could have done those things then, but I probably would not have gotten where I am.
yeah. No, I hear you on
Yeah.
that. When I think of,
Yeah.
I didn't put anything in, but when I think
Mm-hmm.
of something through over the years that
Mm-hmm.
became like freedom, and I wasn't conscious of it at the time, and this was a couple decades ago, but when I did start wearing my hair in its natural state, which is, very
Mm-hmm.
curly, and just, yeah, definitely very curly and thick,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
but up until then, I always felt, definitely like in 20s and my 30s, that I had to um, use relaxer and comb,
Mm-hmm.
have it hot pressed and straight all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
I can honestly say, once I went with my natural hair, there was a definite freedom in that, and I have rarely looked back. And just, yeah, there is, I think for a lot of Black women, around the hair and looks and things, where you just, when you accept it for yourself, there's a freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time not to look like yourself. It takes
Yes.
time and money.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, I have other questions for you. I wanted to thank you because you mentioned about that part of that, being free and being your authentic self. You mentioned extending grace to yourself and accept the
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, whether they're big life mistake you may think of as big life mistakes, or just
Mm-hmm.
small things that impact you. But we forget that. And I know I forget that. Like just
Mm-hmm.
forgiving
Mm-hmm.
myself, accepting my mistakes as much as my triumphs, and moving on.
Because those things stick to us, right? Very often women of color, we do something and you are forever that thing. No
Hmm.
one wants to see you as anything different. They actually get, sometimes angry when you want to move on and do something differently. I often think about that. I'm a big fan of popular culture. I can't help it. That's where I
No
started
shame in
writing.
that.
And I think people think it's frivolous, but popular culture is very powerful. And I look at the ways people talk about the singer Sierra,
Hmm.
who now is married to this awesome football player, and they seem to have this lovely family. But at one time was dating, Future, who's a hip hop star, and but then moved on, and they are forever like, even though he is a guy who has lots of different kids, lots of different moms. They have branded her for dating him, saying she is worthless, forever dating that guy in the past. And they don't understand why this new man would ever want her. So, it's like, as women, we're not even allowed to like date the guy that maybe if we, really thought about it, like when we're younger, that we wouldn't have dated him. We are forever branded with whatever that mistake is.
Yeah.
And, and painted. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. No, good point. With relationships as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I want to ask you before I get specific questions about your book and your
Mm-hmm.
writing journey,
Mm-hmm.
because we are in this very specific and interesting, and for many of us, jubilant time. What is it? Hope
Yeah.
with the thing that spark. I had to ask
Which
myself.
smells like it. I
I
think it
know, I know.
is.
I had to ask myself, what is that I'm feeling? Like, oh, it's hope. Yeah. I want to know what was what were your first thoughts and feelings when you heard that President Biden was stepping aside and endorsing Kamala Harris, VP Harris. I'm just curious, what were your thoughts, especially given what you write about and promote?
I don't know if there is a word for trepidation and excitement. Is it like trepicitement or expedition? I don't know, but it was like, it was exciting because I think she's amazing. Like I used
Right.
to love it when she was a senator to watch her, like in some of those, people would testify before Congress and like, oh, I was like, oh, get them. I really liked her,
Yeah.
and I think she'll be a wonderful president. But then the other, after listening to that, immediately I was like, oh no. Because for all of those reasons, I know how people feel about women. I know
Hmm.
how people I know how people feel about Black women in particular. And it's like, I want her to be okay.
Yeah.
And I knew that over the next several months, we're going to be listening to some really ugly stuff. And it's going to get said. And, and not only do you have to hear ugly things being said, you have to watch people cheer for it and parrot it. And that's going to be
Yeah.
hard. It's going to be hard, I imagine, not just for her, but she has made the choice to run for president. And I think people who do that have like thick skin, but it's going
Yeah.
to be hard for all of us who have to listen to it.
Yeah.
Like, even, and this isn't particularly about Black women, about women, JD Vance talked about Kamala and said that, she can't be trusted as a leader because she's not had biological children.
Oh,
And
right.
so, she has no skin in the game. Well, just like Kamala, I've not had biological children. I got married and became bonus mom to two, just like Kamala. So when he says that about her, talking about me too, and every other woman who
Me
hasn't
too.
had biological children. So,
Yeah.
you have to hear those things
Right.
again and again and again during this silly season, as Hillary Clinton called it.
Right. Right. Well, I think people like that are, well, not only racist, but ignorant
Mhm.
to not realize that we live in a world now where we know love is love and there are all different types of families,
Mhm.
and families sometimes are created.
Mhm.
Some people like myself, I have nieces and nephews that I couldn't love more than if they were my own children. Some people take in people from their community, and
Mhm.
there's no one definition for it. And it's just this complete ignorant comment that oddly enough is coming back up, but it's coming back up to bite him in the you know what. I love it. It's not like coming back up to get a dig at
Yeah.
her.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's interesting. But I know what you say. I have a feeling because she's been a senator and
Mhm.
done other things and has been the vice president for the last 4 years. She probably knows what to expect when it comes to misogynistic comments and
Mhm.
racist comments. So we're
Mhm.
probably going to have to, brace
Mhm.
ourselves more than her at this point. Okay, so we got that out. I want, I mentioned in your intro, your bio, that you are
Mhm.
committed to helping Black women live authentically and unapologetically. How would you say you have many not, how would you say so many don't live that way or have not typically lived that way exactly? Like specific examples. And what's the best way for Black women and maybe women of color as well to be more aware of that? Because I think sometimes when we're kind of in these white spaces, you're not even aware that you're thinking a certain way.
It's so ingrained, which is why I said freedom is a practice, because it's so easy to fall back into it. Because I think a lot of us are taught that.
Yeah.
When you're little and do not be acting crazy out here in front of these, like, you know, to act that, you were supposed to act a certain way. One of the women I interviewed for the Sisters Are All Right said, when I walk into a room, I feel like all of those stereotypes enter along with me. And so whatever I do, I have to act in a way that disproves all of those things. You know, I talked to a college professor who was married and pregnant. And she's like, her fingers were swelling and her ring like was getting like cutting off her circulation, but she didn't want to take it off because she was afraid that people were going to look at her and they were going to think she was a single Black mother, and then they were going to think she was less than, and then and she was so worried of how people were going to see her, and that wasn't even the case. She was, not that she had to be, but she was married, and she said the weird thing was that even though I kept the ring on, I still had people coming up to me saying, "You're so brave. How are you doing?" People assumed anyway. So she was going to all this trouble to show up in the way that society deems respectable, but they still saw what they wanted to see anyway. And I mean, that's perhaps a lesson to us. It is hard to remember not to live in relation to those stereotypes, but it often doesn't matter. You might as well do what you're going to do, because people who are determined to see you in a biased way are going to see you in that way no matter what you do.
Good
So,
point. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And how, maybe in the past, have you, or
Mm-hmm.
or even in the present, do you see Black women writers, Black and brown women writers,
Mm-hmm.
having a harder time navigating in spaces that are typically dominated by white writers, and specifically white male writers? I know from working in the book industry, the publishing industry is still, predominantly male, white, um, as well as other aspects of it. So uh, I'm curious because obviously you're very familiar with that, and we often have people watching that are, writers or
Mm-hmm.
want to be writers. So I think kind of if you could speak to that in relation to maybe your journey through the publishing process and the writing process, and having hope that, hey, I will get
Mm-hmm.
to the other side. Yeah.
I've been very lucky. And, I love my editors at Barrett Kohler Publishers, because I talk to so many fellow writers who have said that the biggest hurdle they have is finding someone that will allow them to write authentically and not say, well, I don't understand that turn of phrase, and nobody's going to get that, or that doesn't sound like a family I know, or I don't. I love it that my editor, shout out, Neil and other editors that I've worked with, will read it and go like, I didn't know what you were talking about, but you know your audience, and people can understand context
Yeah.
clues. So there is this idea sometimes that our stories, because they don't sound like stories that the gatekeepers know or know well, or experiences that they know, that our stories aren't valid. So I mean, I think as a writer, we owe it to ourselves to find homes where people will let us do that and not shrink our writing, and to be able to live authentically in that way too. And then
Yeah.
there are other strange things, like, when a writer friend told me when I published my first book that, no one is going to believe your book is traditionally published. You're going to have to tell them. They're going to assume that it's not. And if you have to call a bookstore, maybe you should have a white person, like, pitch the idea of a book event, or, maybe you should have your publisher pitch the
Wow.
book event, because if you do it, they're going to think, oh, she just probably, wrote some poorly written book somewhere. Like, they're not going to give you the same, they're not going to see you having the same qualifications as a writer who might be white or who may be a man. But I think the biggest hurdle is giving us the freedom to actually tell our stories, which is really important.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yes. I mean,
Yeah.
we all have different stories and they need to be out there in the world, and not necessarily, it could be specifically for a Black and brown audience, but for
Mm-hmm.
anybody. Everybody
Like,
wants to hear different stories. Like, you don't have to stay in your own world. That's the beauty of
and yeah, and I
film
like, and but
and books.
and
Yeah.
we know that, right?
Yeah.
Like, we know that because we grow up reading in school a canon that usually doesn't include us. Like, if I can read Moby Dick and the Red Badge of Courage and take something from that, I do think my books are for everyone. Black women are centered, but I think there are things in it that everybody can learn from, in the same way that I've learned from writers who are not women or who are not Black.
Well, you're bringing up a perfect segue into my next question, Tamara. Um, because yeah, I'm sure in our audience, it's a mixed
Mhm.
audience, a diverse audience,
Mhm.
and I'm just curious, how, if at all, how can white women specifically
Mhm.
kind of be an ally for Black women, like let's say in the workplace, especially a corporate
Mhm.
workplace that may be predominantly white? What can they do if they're listening to you now or they're reading your book? They may say, well, this isn't for me, but how can
Mhm.
it be for them? How can they be an ally, so to speak?
Well, one thing I would point out is white women aren't free either. So, I always say that sexism impacts us all. It just impacts us differently based on our intersecting identities.
Right.
So, I mean, the best thing we can do as members of marginalized groups is listen to each other to acknowledge those differences. Like, we have to be really good at recognizing where our privileges lie,
Mhm.
and where our oppressions lie, and how your experience may be different than mine. Sometimes we're so quick to try to find commonality that we fail to see each other because we don't see the differences. So, in the same ways that we can come together in sisterhood around being women, I need white women to also see the unique challenges of Black women and of queer women and of queer Black women and queer
Yeah.
white women, like all of those intersected identities, to listen, so that when we're fighting on behalf of women, we're fighting on behalf of all of us in all the ways we show up in the world.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
true. I remember in
Mm-hmm.
2016, with the election, that didn't go the way most of us thought it was going to go. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember like starting to almost feel like I was going to have a panic attack that very night. And I called my sister, um, and was just kind of venting to her. And she said, well, what can I say? This just proves our country may be more sexist than it is racist. And I was like, wow, yeah, okay. It was like this very sobering, like, put all the emotions aside and let's just deal with reality and move forward.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's the thing. We have to, you know, yes, it is awesome to be the same, but we can't flatten the experience of being a
Right.
woman so that it, cuts
Yeah,
out all of the different identities that we have and the struggles that we have.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and the last thing I want to ask you about is that I very much noticed the title of your book that you use woman, not
Mm-hmm.
girl. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're like me and you notice books and you notice book titles, we have been in
Mm-hmm.
a many years kind of train here of girl this, girl that, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and not to say there's anything wrong with that per
Mm-hmm.
se, but am I right in thinking that you were very deliberate in using woman versus girl?
Yes, and actually, my last book is Dear Black Girl, which
Right,
actually kind of led into this book because I was talking about, like I mentioned, like, okay, girls need Black women to be okay so that we can help them be okay.
for sure.
Um, and so if we can get free, then we can gift that free. If women can get free, then we can gift that freedom and all rightness to younger generations. Um, it has always stuck in my head. I interviewed a psychologist for a book who deals mostly with young girls of color, predominantly Black girls. And she said a lot of them come to her through systems. And she talked about having this like sister circle for girls. I think it was provided through Medicaid or something like that. And she said that over time, they noticed that the attendance of some of the girls was flagging. Their mothers weren't bringing them, they were being sporadic. And what they discovered is these girls were getting help, and it was bringing up all these issues that then they were discussing at home, which was triggering their mothers' issues, and their mothers had no help. So, the mothers could not assist their daughters in getting to freedom because they weren't free. So this book focuses on women, but then my hope is that once we are free, we're going to gift that to our daughters, or our daughters will automatically be free because we'll raise them to be free.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that nuanced explanation.
Mhm.
And I think it's important. I think as I mentioned, I'm not mad that, there's well-read Black girl. There are a lot of just a lot of girl in relation to meaning women and girls. So I definitely noticed that you did that, and now I
Mhm.
see why, and I love that. I think it's
Mhm.
kind of passing on the torch. And that's great. Thank you so much for doing this. Is there anything else you want to leave us with?
Well, I would just like to tell everyone to keep in touch and to please find me at TamaraWinfreyHarris.com and Tamara Winfrey Harris on the socials, as the
Yes,
kids might say. I don't know. That's probably something old people say, but
I
find me
know. It
on
might be
social
like
media, right?
outdated already or something. You
Yeah.
can't keep up with it. Well, I want
Yeah.
to remind our audience before we go that if you haven't already, on behalf of Book Passage, definitely like and subscribe our channel. It takes you a second to do that, but it really makes a big difference for Book Passage. And also in that same area, you can get a link to buy Tamara's book, A Black Woman's Guide to Getting Free, and you don't have to be Black to buy the book. Um, and I love that it was released in paperback, right? It was released in paperback. I love that. Not only is that environmentally friendly, but it also makes the book very portable, very affordable. No reason why you can't buy several of them and gift them to friends and colleagues. So please click the link and you can get that from Book Passage and we can ship it to you anywhere. If you live in the Bay Area, you can go into either of our stores in San Francisco or Corte Madera, and we have plenty of copies. And I bet, Tamara, that you will send us signed book plates so we can give to people signed copies.
I will so send you signed book plates.
Well, we definitely appreciate that. So definitely avail yourselves to her book, promote it, and follow Tamara, follow Book Passage. And until we see you again at the next event, please be well read. Thank you.